Hi, I'm Owen from Rask Australia. Thanks for tuning in to the Rask Network.
Before we get into today's show, there are a few things we have to go over.
Firstly, what you're about to hear and see is limited to general information only. It's not personal financial advice like you'd get from a financial planner. Also, it's important to remember that past performance is not indicative of future performance. That means that anything that's happened in the past, or we say today, is not necessarily going to reflect what happens in the future. Lastly, please consider that any of the guests or myself are featuring on this program may have a financial interest in some of the products or shares mentioned. That's enough from me. I hope you enjoyed today's program.
Hey Marcus, thanks for taking some time to join me on the Australian Business Podcast.
Thanks, Owen. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, I think this is going to be really interesting for me, at least. At least we've got a listener of one because, as you know, like my background is in investing, but also in like building a business. And we're going to straddle both of those things in the conversation today. We're going to talk about private companies and what goes into building one of those businesses and how you can kind of like optimize your business. But then we're going to talk about like the investing side and why private companies can be so interesting for so many investors too. But I thought maybe just to set the scene, mate, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be involved in primary markets?
Sure. I think my experience kind of leads quite well into having been working for private companies and public, so I've seen both sides of the coin. Originally I'm from New Zealand, started working at Westpac as a little analyst, looking at businesses and how they operate. And then I moved to the UK where I started working for some investment banks or more around the acquisitions or mergers and acquisitions. For 4 years I was working in the UK. Also seen the sights in the darkness at night time at around 5 o'clock. Then I got an opportunity to go to New York, and it's my role kind of changed. I started working for American Express, but I was in the strategy team. And the strategy team didn't really look too much at the credit cards. It looked at the travel businesses. I mean, I sold a bank in Egypt, so I was placed in Egypt for 6 months. So there's various different roles, and we reported to the CEO in New York, which was really interesting and exciting. You know, New York in itself is an exciting place. I would leave my apartment at 10 o'clock on Sunday night and just get hit by all the activity that was outside in Manhattan. So it's always a city that never sleeps, as they say. As I sort of matured and started to look for more of a long-term progression after 4 years in New York, I moved back to Sydney, and I got a job at Merrill Lynch working for an investment banking team covering financial services and infrastructure, and then also specialised in sort of companies that were up and coming, that were still private and looking to list. So, Merrill Lynch would look at funding the facility from a debt and equity position as well. Then I went to ANZ, where I looked at purely debt funding in the financial services and infrastructure space, and looking at a lot of the project finance opportunities in the infrastructure. We sold Queensland Rail, we looked at Transgrid financing, and I looked at Origin Energy and AGL as some of the clients that I looked after in the institutional bank at ANZ. And then I got a role as a CEO of a publicly listed company, which was a non-bank deposit taker. We were taking retail deposits from customers and then on lending some of that funding to small and medium enterprises, where the asset book grew substantially, and it's a successful business that I was at for quite some time. And then I got approached to work at Primary Markets. The business was set up 6 years ago by two senior lawyers who were the founders, and they've asked me to come in to look at the business and see how we can really accelerate the opportunity to support private companies through their growth period. And one of the exciting things was I redesigned the whole new technology platform to make it really user-friendly for our investors to use and make it visible for a wide audience, and then enable people or investors to get in on these really exciting private companies before they go public, where historically it was only made available for large private equity firms or really big institutions that were buying these companies. So we just tried to broaden the network of opportunities for people.
So Marcus, it's a really interesting backstory. You've kind of gone through like financial markets right around the world, even in Egypt. I've never met someone that was like working on businesses in Egypt and things like this. And now you're in this role at primary markets, which maybe we should introduce what primary markets does at the higher level. And then I'll ask you some questions from a business owner's perspective of how you see the ecosystem. So maybe just a really simple one is like, what do primary markets do? Like, what do you do behind the scenes and how does it help business owners and investors?
Sure. We do two things primarily. So we put private companies onto our platform and enable shareholders and investors invest in those companies. So if you're an owner of a share, you can trade those shares. You can buy and sell quite clearly, and we show a really clear platform where you can see the market depth of the company. So in essence, we're providing liquidity.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other half of the business also undertakes capital raising. So we raise capital for working capital or to help businesses expand, private companies expand their opportunities and accelerate their revenue and earnings growth.
So you basically serve two sides of the business. So you serve like the business, but you also serve the shareholders in those businesses.
Correct.
Investors.
Correct.
So I think there's a lot for us to unpack here. We've spoken on the show before about like crowdfunding platforms and the use cases for those, but and we'll get to those and the differences between that and primary markets in a minute. But there are just some like overall, I guess, ideas that I just want to cover off with you because you're the expert in this. Can you tell us how the Australian business market kind of shakes out from like a public, maybe you'll have to define what that means, public versus private marketplace? Because when we caught up in Sydney a while ago, you had some really interesting ideas around the size of the markets and how many businesses there are in Australia exactly.
Sure. So to make it really simple, there's three basic types of companies. A public company, which is listed on the stock exchange, usually the ASX in Australia. And then we break down to the realm of a private company where there's generally two types of private companies. One's a proprietary company or a private PTY company, and that usually has 50 shareholders or less.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a public or an unlisted public company, which has more than 50 shareholders. And as those shareholders grow, then those types of companies usually move towards an ASX listing.
Okay.
What we've seen in the market at the moment is we've seen around 2,000 companies, just over 2,000 companies that are publicly listed on the ASX. And there's nearly 6 times more private companies in the market if you do a like-for-like comparison on the terms of the revenue size. I mean, there's also the corner shops, but if you're doing a comparison of companies with over $5 million of revenue, there's nearly 10 to 12,000 of those companies. So the market's really large for private companies in Australia at the moment.
I think that's the kind of key thing, which is like, so when you look at like the ABS data, I was actually looking at it this morning in anticipation for us having a chat today. And if we take an even broader approach of $2 million, I was estimating just based on ABS data, it was just my like kind of rough rule of thumb. I didn't do any sophisticated calculations or whatever. It looked like there was, tens of thousands that are over $2 million in sales a year or revenue per year. And then, like you said, even if you go up again to more revenue, there's still 4 or 5 or more times the amount of companies that are available. And so this kind of creates this middle market, which is private in air quotes, this middle market of companies that either have business owners who want to sell or at least probably have lots of shareholders, whether they're employees or other like stakeholders in the business that benefit. And there's really no way to unlock that, if you get what I mean.
Correct, 100%. And that's where and why we've built our platform. I mean, we're really one of the only platforms globally that offer a service where people who have invested in private companies have a clear path for exit, right? Or they can get in before they list if they've seen the growth rate. So we really just tried to bring this sector, which is large and really growing overseas, available to our member base, which now we've got over 110,000 members on our platform.
So maybe this begs the question of why, because I see this like thing playing out in the markets. I'm not the person that notices. It's been going on for quite a few years. They say that there's a lot of private companies that stay private. So companies that never really make the stock exchange, even though they're big enough. they choose to stay private for longer because, I mean, there are probably a few different reasons. Maybe I'll ask you that question. Why do you think we're seeing that? Like more companies stay as private companies?
Originally, the business was here to help companies prepare themselves to go public. And what we've found is now we're generating a lot of liquidity on our platform. So there is not a need to so much go public, but more importantly, the cost of going public is extremely expensive. The average cost we see annually is around $500,000, and that's due to a listing fee. It's also governance, auditing fees, disclosure requirements, and compliance requirements, and all those things just take added staff, added costs, and added detail that's required. So from being a publicly listed company is expensive, and you're really at the market forefront of a significant number of companies and investors looking at how the company performs over a short period of time.
That's when you think about that as a business owner. So say we're not talking about micro-sized businesses. We're talking about businesses with typically a few $1 million of revenue and whatever. But even still, to be able to afford $500,000 a year and all this extra stuff that just comes with being on the stock exchange, it seems like a lot. One of the things that you mentioned to me previously as well is that the idea of like when you have shareholders through some like primary markets, you can have you can kind of be a bit more of a master of your own destiny, so to speak, in that you can kind of say to these are the shareholding rules. This is how it's done. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about, like, I'm imagining a business owner that maybe does want to offer their employees who earn shares in the business or have shareholders, like myself, I have shareholders in my business, right? How do they go about accessing primary markets, setting those rules, and basically using the platform to give them the option to sell?
Sure. So a lot of owners of private companies are quite nervous around price discovery. Basically, value is based on supply and demand, or buyers and sellers. So one of the key differences between ourselves and a public market is we enable the company and its board to set the trading rules. And so some of those trading rules are, you might only want your shareholders to trade during certain periods of time. You might want to set a minimum price where people can't trade below than a certain price. Or you also might want to approve who some of the new investors are that's coming into your company, whether they're a competitor, whether they're aligned to your strategy, and also a minimum share price. So historically, we've seen on a public company, people can put in very small parcels and it really affects the share price quite quickly. Whereas on a private market, the company can control those areas to give less volatility to the company, but also have a platform where we can promote the company at the same time and build a shareholder base that's usually made up of sophisticated investors rather than small day traders or people that are putting really small investments in.
So I'm imagining that I'm an investor now, right? Because there's so many small businesses that I love and would love to invest in. But one of the things is in private markets, often you have to buy the whole thing, or you have to find a seller who's willing to sell you a big chunk. And then you just have to accept that you don't control the business and there's no way for you to sell and you just have to stay there forever, basically. Can you talk through some of like the reporting requirements of small businesses? Like, we're a huge fan on the show of telling people that even if you have a shareholder of one, like yourself, you should be writing like a letter to yourself. You should be doing quarterly reviews for yourself because it's that chance for introspection. But then obviously having shareholders, you want to share that information with shareholders too. So can you talk through what is typical of companies that use primary markets to report back to their shareholders?
Yeah. So, the business that we try and promote is all around communication to the shareholders. And that's how you get their support in a company, and you get their support for a long period of time. And as a public company, you do need to provide a lot of documents. You need to provide a 4C, a half-year report, an annual report, certain disclosures that are really relevant to the company that may or may not impact the share price. And we do try and encourage companies to follow along those similar lines as a private company. So we request that they provide their half-year accounts, their annual accounts, presentations of what the company's doing, the successes it's had, the concerns. And what we've found is there's different types of levels of disclosures. Ultimately, on our platform, it's to the requirements or to the governance that the company sets on what they would like to disclose. But it's all around, we've found, is communication and how that is marketed effectively to our investor base. It's got to be really clear and concise, but on a regular basis, providing news to their investors as they grow, a longevity in supporting the company's growth and participate in ongoing capital raises that the company may undertake.
How about, there are a few questions I have around like the actual way the platform is put together. One would be like, how do you ensure that, I guess, do you have to regulate it in terms of you like just overseeing what people are saying or what companies are saying? Do you have to do that? And then the other side of it is like security. Like if you have your shares and your money on the platform, like where does that go? Who controls it? How are you protecting that, so to speak?
Sure. So let's just talk about the money, because everybody has that concern. So if you're a trader, primary markets is more of a facilitator between the buyer and the seller. Okay. So in order to come onto our platform, we require them to be KYC'd and AML checked, which is done via a third party for us. And any funds that transfer between the buyer and the seller, we don't touch the money. And so it's held in an escrow account at Perpetual, which is banked at ANZ. The forms that we get is we check their shareholding certificate from the person that's selling the shares, but we also check with the company's share register, which is a third party as well. And in most cases, we also check with the company. So 3 checks of verification that they own the shares. And then once the money transfers through, it's done via our trustee account. So it's quite a simple and very quick process, but it's also a safe process, which the exchange is between the buyer and the seller.
Do you find that some companies come to you and they only want to keep it like a closed net of shareholders? So like, I'd imagine like a company comes to you and says, we have 30 shareholders, most of them are employees, but some of them are like adjacent to that. And we don't really want to open it up, but we just want to give them a way to buy and sell.
Yeah, we've got quite a few companies. So we've got companies on our platform that have a trading platform, but just for their shareholders. Just for their shareholders, but also just for their employees. New employees coming on, and there's an ability for them to have equity in the company, but we give them an ability to have liquidity of those shares at any time that the company stipulates. Or previous employees may have shares in the company. And so those types of rules are very set from the company. For instance, we've got Bloom's a chemist. And so the only way you're allowed to buy shares is if you're a chemist. And so they've set that rule. We've also got a very wealthy, large family on our platform who just let their family members trade shares within their company or their family trust. So there's different types of rules that we enable companies to set in terms of who can and can't trade. But we're an independent platform, so we're not swayed between the buyers, buyer or the seller, or in terms of who has rights over the price of the transactions that go through.
How much does it? So you obviously built this platform. It seems like it's quite complex, right? Because you've got it's integrating a lot of different people, and it's not just an Australian business. I know it's around the world. How much does it cost to use the platform? Is it dependent on like the size of the business? Is it dependent on the number of shareholders, or is it just like one fee and then you pay a transaction fee? Like, how does it all work?
Yep, sure. Just like any platform, we charge a fee to the seller. So if you're selling shares, we charge a brokerage fee, and the fee can vary from 4 to 6% based on the total transaction size, which is the price times the number of shares.
Mm-hmm.
And the buyer does pay for the KYC and AML, which is a pretty inconsequential fee. So ultimately, we're charging the seller who's leaving the company.
Okay.
And the types of investors that we usually have are sophisticated investors on the platform, family offices, small PE firms or institutions, and people that have pre-qualified in order to come onto the platform to purchase those shares.
So when you say pre-qualified, it'd be like someone that in the Bloom's the chemist thing, someone that's like approved to buy.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So can anyone join primary markets as an investor?
Anyone can join primary markets to look at the opportunities on our platform, where there's over 100 opportunities. Most of them are Australian based, but we've also got a lot of American unicorns that people can purchase. But in order to make a trade, you'll need to qualify as a sophisticated investor and do your KYC and AML on the platform.
Right. So I guess one of the things is a few more questions around this. One is like, so say there's all these like small private equity firms or like other investors that are available on the platform and looking to invest in companies.
Mm-hmm.
What is your target market in terms of like someone that is a seller? So like I'm imagining a business owner or a group of business owners in a private business. What kind of what size would they typically be? And then how do they go about promoting themselves to the investors?
Yep. So the typical size, if you refer back to the ASX, which was sort of $40-50 million, right, is the typical size. Our sizes range from a market cap of usually $10 million to we've got a company that's worth $7 billion on our platform. Generally, it's preferred with a shareholder base of 30 and above, moving towards the 50 shareholder base, because the more shareholders there are, that provides liquidity in the platform and it enables the share price accretion or share price value to be maintained or to increase. But ultimately, the company needs to have a revenue of over $2 million, has a clear path for profitability, and it's formulated itself to be really clear and communicate regularly to its shareholders. And the way we promote the companies that are on our platform is we send EDMs or electronic distribution marketing to our 110,000 investors twice a week. We also promote them on social media and on our website, and also just other forms of social media where we pay on behalf of the company to promote them and the opportunities that they represent.
Because obviously it's like in your best interest as a business as well to promote the business, because you want trading activity, because that's how you make money as well. So you want the companies to be communicating well, you want the companies to report well and facilitate that, because you're going to benefit if they are doing the right thing. You collect that fee. Okay, so they're around about $10 million is like a kind of like a good minimum hurdle.
Yep.
So that's the total value of the shares. People will be thinking that's revenue. It's not. It's the total value of the company. And I've got one follow-up question around, say if I don't have this, but say if I had 30 employees now, you mentioned before that one of the tests is like you want to be a sophisticated investor. But imagine if you have employees, a lot of them wouldn't qualify for sophisticated investor status. I'm assuming they can still join the platform because they're still they're shareholders, so they can still join and get in and still be able to sell.
Correct. That is correct. So actually under our license, we've got a license to trade for sophisticated investors, but also retail. But more importantly, if you've already bought shares before, then you've qualified for the terms and conditions of the company. So we do let them sell their shares. Right? If they don't qualify as a sophisticated investor, we do not enable them to buy other shares in other companies on our platform.
Okay, I get you. So I'm just thinking in terms of risk here, thinking in terms of a business owner, Marcus. If I join the primary markets platform, I facilitate some of my shareholders selling. Can I easily go from the primary markets platform? Like, is it like, or is it to go there and never come back kind of thing? You know what I'm saying?
Well, look, we haven't lost. We've only lost one company, and that's because they've gone on to the ASX. Right. With their valuations trading significantly lower now than it was. But there is no contract to say that you can't leave. You'll have to give a month notice period. But besides that, we're providing really strong liquidity and value accretion on the shares over all of the companies that we've got on our platform, which is over 100 now, is generally in the positive realm. there's not a lot of day traders. So, investors that we do put on are really in for the longer term rather than short selling. So there is no contract. You can leave whenever you need to. We'll support you. We'll also provide marketing opportunities for your company and for your products as well on our platform to the 110,000. So it's a bit of a win-win for both companies. Even if there's not a lot of trading, you're still promoting your company and the products and the opportunities that you foresee ahead of time.
I've maybe got one more question for you, which is just around, obviously you deal with a lot of businesses and a lot of investors, so you get to see it firsthand what's going on in the marketplace. What are some of you said communication before is like a key element of the businesses being successful and making this market for their shareholders. Do you have any guidance for people that are listening to this and maybe fall into this bracket of my business is this big and I do have shareholders which either I want to get rid of or they want to sell?
Yep.
Do you have some sort of guidance on some of the things they can do to improve their chances of being successful if they were to go to primary markets, like communication, things that they should know before they do it?
Yeah, look, so we can get the company up and running on our platform within a week, right? So it's a really quick process. But what we have found is that if you look at a company such as BHP, which is listed, they've got a whole team of marketing, investor relations, and how they present their story to the market. Now, we're not saying that the smaller private companies would need that, but it's the way you present your results, it's the way you present your strategy. It's really clear, it's easy to articulate. It really sends a strong message to the investors of why your business is worth investing, the pros and cons and the opportunities, and how you've mitigated some of the risks in the company, and just pulling those pieces together where it's a presentation. You've got a clear term sheet, you've got a clear way to present to the market on a regular basis, and we help companies prepare all that information. We give them guidelines and help promote a really clear story, because investors don't usually have a lot of time to make a decision. So it's got to really be front of mind for people that are willing to trade. And we see the average trading size on our platform is around $150,000.
Oh, right.
Minimum trade size is $5,000. So, there's a wide-ranging array of investment opportunities on the platform for different people.
So that's pretty, that's a pretty, it's obvious why, people aren't day trading, because it costs them, what roughly did you say 6% to trade, but also they're bigger parcel sizes. So you're not inclined to be a day trader on the platform.
Correct.
You're inclined to be a long-term investor and buy into the story.
Yeah. But, on the ASX, people can put a $500 share order in, and if they're the only trader for the day and it's at a lower price, and the share price sits at that. So we try and restrict those types of trades by making a minimum investment size. If you're buying, there's not really a cost to purchase. It's more on the sell side. But sophisticated investors usually have a greater understanding of turbulent times in companies, so they're usually longer term holders, and those are the investments or investors that we look to hold on our platform, which really do support the private companies that come on our platform. So, as private companies look to shed investors that are trying to get out, we're providing really strong, articulated investors that have passed a 708 test, which have got a number of assets or a higher income usually.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, Marcus, you've definitely provided us a really interesting intro to an opportunity or option for people who run businesses or even are shareholders in a business and think, I am trying to sell this, because this is one of those frictional areas where, as your business grows, you tend to think, well, I've got all these legacy shareholders, maybe they're former employees or in early stage investors, and sometimes they're looking to sell.
Yep.
And sometimes you as a business owner probably are happy for them to get off the share register and just have one bigger shareholder or multiple other shareholders, and raise capital if you want to sell more shares. It's pretty, that whole process is, anyone that's been through that process will know how cumbersome, tedious, and admin heavy that is. So a way to solve that is really welcome. And people can head to primarymarkets.com There'll be a link in the show notes for anyone that wants to learn more. And I'm on the website here on the other side of my screen, Marcus, and I can see all the different opportunities that are available, as well as some information about these businesses. So you can see, if you're watching or listening to this, you can see how other businesses present themselves, and you can learn more about the primary markets business and the process. So, mate, I really do appreciate you taking some time out of your day and joining me on the show.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to chatting to your members. I'll be happy to help them through the process.